that's over to the left, right? We're trying to find the right-hand side of the previous.
Correct. And that's why when...
Why do we put them... Why don't we put it underneath that so we kind of know?
Underneath...
Underneath G, H, and I.
J, G, H, and I.
So we know what we're calculating, what we're trying to figure out.
But to put these under G, H, and I means that we are overwriting G, H, and I.
Well, we already found the question mark, right? We returned value there already.
Okay, tell me which row are we talking about?
So at row 18, right?
Row 18?
Actually 19, we already have a return value.
We're not done yet because...
We
okay.
have a return value for the first question mark.
Yes.
So then we go back to column G, since we already have one return value on the other invocation.
But it's not the same invocation. It's not the same invocation. You have to see how many invocations we have, concurrently. Because every time you return something, you only affect the last invocation, but not the one before that.
Thank you, that's what I was trying to ask.
Okay, all right. Do we have any questions about row 18 itself? Why did I use column J, K, and L again to set up return info N and X? Is that a question?
Got that.
We got that. Okay. And
19.
do we have any questions about row 19 of column J? Do we have any questions about why we use column 9 as return 6 times question mark? That has to do with... Okay, let's roll back time a little bit even more, okay? Let's roll back to row 17, okay? Row 17 of the trace is the end of one invocation of S5, right? As a result, we have to go back to where the return info cell is telling me to go back to. The return info cell is this. It's telling me to go back to line 9. As a result, I go back to line 9. Not a problem. Okay, but line 9 looks like this now. Can I actually perform the return action? I cannot do the return action because...
The equation's not finished.
Exactly. So we have one more invocation to deal with. And as a result, on this line 9 of row 18 of the trace, we have to invoke S5 again, using n minus 1 to specify n, using x to specify x. And as a result, we reallocate columns J, K, and L, set them up as return info n and x, and we use these values to fill those columns.
Now those values come from age being n minus 1 minus 1, which brings it to a 0.
Exactly.
It just happens to work out the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So then, based on that logic, when we go back to putting a value into the question mark in the return value in column in G9.
In G9, okay. So that's an action we perform later.
Right, but we will have to do, because again, using that statement that he used, the equation is not complete. That's what tells us that we will need to go.
But that's later. Okay, so
right.
Okay, I understand your question.
Okay.
But let's get this out of the way first. So we are all convinced that row 19 is okay. We don't have any additional questions about row 19. So once row 19 is done, we have set up the 3 columns that we need for a brand new invocation, and we transfer control to the first action line of the subroutine, which is line 4. Line 4 doesn't really do much. It's just a conditional statement. We decide to go into the then branch. We add 1 to x, and that's why column C gets incremented to 7. Then we go to line 6. Now line 6 is a plain and simple return statement. It does not have invocations in it. So that means we are ready to execute it anytime we encounter line 6. In this case of row 22 of the trace, when we execute line 6, x has a value of, x is a reference of column C, and column C at that point has a value of 7. So we are effectively returning a value of 7. Returning 7 means we have to find the rightmost return info cell, copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value we are returning, and we're done. Now remember, when you execute a return statement, you don't care about the return info cell itself. It is not your job to execute what is inside the return info cell. It is just your job to change the question mark to a specific value. Okay, I think that is the source of some confusion. Okay, what is the job of a return statement? The job of a return statement is 1, locate the rightmost return info cell. 2, copy and paste it. 3, change the question mark to the value that you're actually returning, and you're done. Okay, you don't care about what is inside the return info cell except for that one question mark. Are we doing okay with this? Okay. So that means, on row 22, this is all we have to do. We find the rightmost return info cell, we copy and paste it, we change the question mark to the value I'm supposed to return, I'm all done. After I'm done with line 6, I get out of the conditional statement, I continue on to line 11, which is the end of the subroutine. Deallocates the 3 columns, then I have to figure out where am I supposed to go. Well, then we take a look at the return info cell. In other words, the content of the return info cell is not utilized until you are past the end of the subroutine. Because only at that point you have to find out, oh, where am I supposed to go? Is that making any sense? So that's why it's only at row 23 of the trace that we have to start to think, oh, where am I supposed to go? Because I'm at the end of a subroutine. At the end of a subroutine, you have to rely on return info to tell you, I see I'm supposed to go back to line 9, and line 9 now has both the right-hand side and the left-hand side of the multiplication resolved. Yep?
But at column G, row 9, you're only asking for the first. There's only one question mark. Why would we invoke the second time to find the other side? It's not
Later. Okay, just remember what I said. Okay, remember what I said. The job of okay.
Then column G should be changed to return question mark times.
No. No. Okay, there are 2 things that you have to you have to pay attention to. One is, what do you do when you execute a return statement? The second thing is, what do you do at the end of a subroutine? Those 2 things are what we are getting confused about. Okay? When you execute a return statement, like line 6 here, what you do is you copy and paste the return info cell and change the question mark to a specific value, and that's all you have to do. At the end of a subroutine, you utilize the return info cell so you know what to do next. Okay? So in this case, we are returning, because we are on line 11 of the program, of the pseudocode. I deallocate these 3 columns, but then I have to figure out what am I supposed to do next. Cell G22 tells me, oh, I'm supposed to go back to line 9, and therefore, we go back to line 9. Line 9 now looks like this, return 6 times 7. There are no additional invocations to deal with, so I can actually go ahead and execute the return of the return statement. Okay, implicitly I have to perform the multiplication first and then the return action. But the multiplication part is easy, I don't really need any representation. So that's why on row 24, I actually go ahead and execute the fully resolved line 9, which is specified by J22. Now, tell me again, what am I supposed to do when I execute a return statement?
Fill in the question.
Exactly. Okay, and that's all I'm going to do, is to fill in the question mark. I look at G9. Okay, it has a question mark. I filled it in. I'm done. I don't care what is in that cell. I really don't. Not at this point. This is too early for me to deal with that. Okay, so I think this is why we have some confusion, because the confusion has to do with what does the return statement do, and what do we do at the very end of a subroutine? Those are two entirely different things. Okay, so let's go ahead, after line 9, where do we go? Line 9 is the end of the else branch. We get out of the conditional statement. We go to line 11. Line 11 is the end of a subroutine. We deallocate the 3 columns that we allocated for this invocation, and then we go back to wherever line of return info tells me to go back to. Okay, it tells me that I have to go back to line 9. But this time, when I get back to line 9 looks like this. I am not ready to do the multiplication, let alone the return action itself, because I have another invocation. So now we have to invoke it. Okay. So now, as the result of invoking S5 again, based on the cell G24, I have to reallocate basically the same 3 columns, and just so happens to use the columns for the same rows in this case. In other words, we need one for return info, we need one for n, and then we need one for x. And as it turns out, the n is still 1, and x is still, the same alias. But the return info is different, because we are attempting to execute line 9, but we can't because we have one additional invocation. When you invoke this particular, when you deal with this invocation, you have to replace it with a question mark so that it becomes a placeholder for its own return value. And that's why on row 27, we specify the return info cell as simply return 42 times question mark.
Can you say that thing again about the return value?
That's really hard. I cannot remember what I said just moments ago. I can try. Okay, yeah. It doesn't mean that I won't try. It simply means that I cannot remember. Okay. So let's talk about this
I got
again.
confused on line 27, column H. Shouldn't that
Row
be 0?
27, column H.
Shouldn't that be 0?
No, it should not, because, okay, now this is the other thing that is important. When I execute line 9, what is my context? Which columns provide my context at that point?
GH and I.
Nope. GH and I are all deallocated. Look at these X's here. I cannot use columns that are deallocated to give me a context. Okay, what is N?
D, E, and F now.
D, E, and F, exactly. So that's why, when I look at the invoke, let me use the mouse pointer, so that will also be a part of the video capture. So when I try to execute line 9, the way it is described in G24, I have to figure out what is n minus 1, because the new parameter n depends on that. But since my current context, when I execute line 9 of row 26, my context is switched back to D, E, and F. So this n here refers to column E, which has a value of 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, and that's why the new column, the newly reallocated column H now has a value of 1. Yep.
Because we're tracing this and it gets pretty big, if on the final or any of our tests, we put little notes to ourselves saying which in we're referring to, like in this case it would be E2 or E5, could I put that in the trace itself just to help me keep track, or would you grade down? Because right now, H,
You can add additional annotations and comments to help yourself.
Yeah,
I'm just
fine.
looking for stuff that I'm looking for, but if there's extra stuff, that's okay. I don't really mark anything down
I
because
just
of.
want to make sure it wasn't going to confuse you as to what we're doing if we start throwing in E3
Mhm.
and referencing for our own reference.
It won't look as bad, when you're doing it, because I have a low resolution screen to begin with, and then I have to bump up the font size, just so that people in the back can see everything. But when you're doing it, we can either do it in the lab or we can do it on paper.
Well, I'm doing it with you